So I'll be honest with you, I watched the video by Linus Tech Tips on the 6-year-old test where they compared an LG G3 and an iPhone 6 to see which one would hold up better over the 6 years that passed. However, I saw in the comments that a lot of people were frustrated that they actually updated the ROM to a newer version of Android when its actual supported version is Android 6. So today, I'm going to be comparing these two, the iPhone 6 Plus and the LG G3, to see how do these phones fare today, 7 years later, on their most supported software, this being iOS 12 and this being Android 6. And honestly, I want to see if they're still even usable today. Before I begin, I'll give you a little rundown of how I'll format this. So I'll discuss the design, display, cameras, processor and speed, speakers and microphone, battery, and notable features, and I'll attach a score to each section. You can also look in the description for the chapters for each section if you want to jump to it. Also, I did a review of the iPhone 6 Plus in early 2021, so a lot of the scores won't have changed from that video, so we can still use that as a baseline. Okay, let's get to it. Both of these phones have a completely different approach to how they were designed, and as a result, one is a lot more functional than the other. Hint, it's the G3. The LG G3 has a mostly plastic build with a textured back that makes it look and feel more premium than it actually is, and of course, a beloved removable back that allows you to change the battery and expand the storage. There's also a speaker grill on the back, as well as the only buttons that you'll find on the entire phone. These 3 buttons control a lot, but I'll delve into that later in the video. Of course, there's also a camera, flash, and the laser autofocus system. Shifting to the iPhone 6 Plus, you get an aluminum build with these plastic antenna lines that go across the bottom and top of the phone. There's also a stainless steel Apple logo cut out from the aluminum. It also has the iPhone text along the bottom and the camera bump near the top. Both of these phones have a headphone jack on the bottom. The iPhone uses the Lightning port, while the G3 uses micro USB. The iPhone also has its speakers on the bottom, which is going to be more important later in the video. Flipping both to the front, the iPhone and the G3 differ greatly. The iPhone has quite thick bezels compared to the G3, and this is where the G3 really looks so much more futuristic compared to the iPhone. There are also the front-facing cameras up top, and the iPhone features a physical home button with Touch ID, where the G3 uses virtual buttons on screen. The bezels on the iPhone depend on what color iPhone you get, so Space Gray has black bezels and the silver and gold options have a white bezel. With the G3, the bezel is mostly black with a gray strip on the bottom, unless you got the white option. However, the top and side bezels will always be black on the G3. Both phones are relatively light, especially compared to flagships today, but the G3 is significantly lighter, being 149 grams while the iPhone is 172 grams. However, the iPhone is also thinner, but this did lead to bend gate issues, so I guess there is a trade-off with both. Overall, I think that both designs have their benefits and drawbacks, and my scores for the 6 Plus will be 5 out of 10 due to the huge bezels, the camera bump, and the lack of expandable storage and easy battery access. For the G3, I would give its design a 6 out of 10. This is due to the front looking pretty modern still and the opportunity to change the battery easily and add storage, but it gets some hits for its plastic build. So the G3 gets it this round. Okay, so now let's talk about something exciting considering these phones, their displays. Being that I edit videos and photos quite often, displays are incredibly important to me and something I think that should be focused on especially. Both of these phones have a 5.5-inch display, the iPhone sporting the Retina HD display with a 1080p resolution and 401 pixels per inch, while the G3 was the first phone to use a 1440p display with a total PPI of 538. This still holds up incredibly well today. Being that the bezels are much thinner on the G3, the phone looks a lot newer than the iPhone, even if the displays themselves are actually not far off. Now, considering the resolution of both is pretty high for their size, I think that the resolution wars don't really matter here. A 1080p display versus a 1440p display on something as small as 5.5 inches isn't something that most people would notice or even care about, I'd argue. However, as someone who needs color accuracy when editing, the iPhone wins it here. We get a full 100% sRGB color reproduction on the iPhone, while the G3 appears to be washed out in comparison. Now, I think this is due to the calibration of the display, which can be tweaked, but for straight out of the box purposes, I'm leaving these both stock. In terms of brightness, it's completely different. The iPhone is able to reach 500 nits of peak brightness, where the G3 falls short of the 400 nit mark, around 360, 380. This means that it's harder to see in direct sunlight, and as a result, it tends to keep brightness levels higher than the iPhone does, which in turn affects battery life since it is a higher resolution display as well. Both of these phones have good displays, but with tricky trade-offs. One having thick and dated bezels, while the other has brightness and color issues. But I think in the end, I'm going to call it a wash, both devices getting a 6.5 out of 10. I would give it to the iPhone here since its usability is better, but the bezels really let it down. The cameras in both of these devices are very different. The G3 features a 13 megapixel sensor on the back with an f2.4 aperture, while the iPhone has an 8 megapixel shooter with an f2.2 aperture. This means that although the iPhone has a smaller megapixel count, it actually does have larger pixels because of the smaller size, which should correlate to better image quality, especially the lower the light is. They both have optical image stabilization and a dual LED flash. The LG G3 also has laser autofocus though, so that should help it focus on subjects much quicker than the iPhone. In practice, both of these phones focus pretty quick, but I did notice that the G3 tends to muddy pictures more, and this correlates to a lot less detail in photos. In comparison, the iPhone has a weak spot for ISO and tends to show grain in the dark areas. Both of these phones aren't really great for today's standards. In terms of video, we get 1080p up to 60 frames per second on the iPhone, and 4K at 30 frames per second surprisingly on the G3. However, I would actually give the video to the iPhone because it tends to be a lot more stable and cleaner overall compared to the G3. On the front, we get a 2.1 megapixel sensor on the G3 while the iPhone has a 1.2 megapixel sensor. Neither of these are very good at all. The G3 also has stereo recording for videos, while the iPhone only does mono audio. I'll show an example later in the video. Overall, the cameras on both these phones are pretty bad by today's standards, but if I have to give a winner, I'd give it to the iPhone. This is due to the better photos and exposure in general, and for having better video stabilization over the G3. I would rate an iPhone a 5 out of 10 for today's standards, while I'd give the G3 a 4 out of 10. Videos on the iPhone 6 Plus are honestly not the worst, but also not the best. Colors are relatively good, and lighting is also pretty good too. However, there is a lot of grain that gets presented when you're in a dark situation, and this is mostly due to the sensor size and the aperture of the lens. So, comparing this to newer phones, it's honestly not that great. But if you look at this from perspective of 2014, it would have been, what you'd get. So let me know what you guys think of the video quality and audio quality on the iPhone 6 Plus. Comparing this to the LG G3, we can see that the LG G3 actually automatically turned on the flash. I had it on auto flash for the G3 and auto flash for the iPhone 6 Plus. So I wanted to put both of these phones in their automatic settings to give you more of a look at what these phones would actually be like when you're using them on a daily basis. So let me know what you guys think about the video quality on the G3 and as well as the audio quality. I'm actually recording right now in 4K, so this is actually really amazing for a phone from 2014. So let me know, do you think the video holds up pretty well today, or do you think it's not so good? Next, let's take a look at the processors and speed for both of these devices. I won't beat around the bush here, both of these devices are pretty slow. The G3 uses the Snapdragon 801, while the iPhone uses the A8 processor. The G3 is clocked at 2.5 GHz, however it is a 32-bit processor, while the iPhone 6 Plus has a 64-bit processor. In terms of RAM, we only get 1 GB of RAM on the iPhone, while the G3 gets 2 GB. This means that more apps can technically stay in the background with the G3, but it's a slim margin. Both of these phones are really not suited for the big apps that we have today, and the usability shows. Games and apps can take a while to load on both, while YouTube videos actually can stutter while playing on the G3. I wouldn't want to use either of these phones for a daily use case, but if I had to decide, I'd probably get it to the iPhone, since it does have official software support that is only 2 generations behind, versus the G3, which is actually more than 5 years behind in software updates. For scores, I'd give the iPhone a 3 out of 10 and the G3 a 2.5 out of 10. Taking a look at the mics and speakers on both these phones, we find that they both have a single speaker, and the G3 is able to record in stereo, while the iPhone can only do mono. However, the G3 has its speaker facing the back, while the iPhone has its speaker on the bottom. This means that if you want to watch a video on the iPhone, it's a lot more likely your hand will actually push the audio towards you when you hold the phone, versus the G3, which is on the back. As a result, I think that the iPhone actually has an advantage when it comes to watching videos. However, the G3 has a better mic. Here's an example for both. The microphone and the video quality of the front-facing camera on the LG G3 really isn't the best. I mean, there's a lot of grain on my face and my hair, and you can see the shadows are getting a little bit crushed here, and especially the highlights here are blown. But I do think that we are recording in 1080p, which is honestly pretty good, so let me know what you guys think about the video and microphone quality on this phone. Switching over to the iPhone's front-facing camera, we also have a lot of grain again. However, you do see a lot more detail. So like you can see the individual strands of my hair more better. And if you look in this part here, that was blown out on the G3, and the shadows are more even here too. So there is a big lighting difference, I think. But what do you guys think? Do you think it's a lot better or just a little bit better? Also, this is only 720p, so that is something to consider too. Let me know what you guys also think about the microphone quality. Overall, I'd give this section a draw, both having their benefits and drawbacks, and I think that both are equally matched in this section. For scoring, I'd give both the iPhone and the G3 a 3 out of 10, since in today's standards, they aren't too great, but overall perform around the same. Okay, so if we take a look at the battery next, we find that both of these phones can actually vary quite a bit, and this is really due to the age of the battery. This particular 6 Plus had its battery replaced in 2017, so it's fairly new, while the G3 is still using the original one from 2014. Because of this, I can't give a fair comparison. However, the G3 has a major advantage, as it allows you to easily swap batteries by taking the back cover off. Because of this, the G3 gets a major win here, with a score of 8 out of 10, while the iPhone gets a 6.5 out of 10. Finally, let's take a look at the notable features for both of these phones and see how we can add to its points. The G3 brought the 1440p display and a super light and thin design, along with the laser autofocus system. However, there's a couple other features that helps this phone stand out. There's actually an IR blaster on this phone, which allows you to control your TV, which is pretty nice. And there's also the ability to install custom ROMs for Android, so you can technically update this yourself. Also, there is support for NFC, and the headphone jack allows for higher quality out, so you can actually use the headphones at 24 bits or 192 kHz. Finally, there's also support for wireless charging, surprisingly, but this can only happen with a special dock from LG, but I did think that this was pretty interesting. Overall, I'd give the G3 a 7 out of 10 for its notable features. With the iPhone, we get Touch ID, which makes unlocking the device much easier, and with NFC, this also paved the way for Apple Pay for the first time, which is actually something that has expanded a ton since its first release. There's also support for the Metal API, which allowed developers to create more graphically intense apps for this iPhone. Also, there is cinematic video stabilization for videos, along with OIS, which means that videos are super stable on this iPhone. The final main feature for this phone is that it does support all the way up to iOS 12, so it is technically a lot more secure and up-to-date versus the G3 on its stock software. So that is something to consider if you're looking at buying a used phone from this time. However, I don't know why you would, honestly. Buy something that's like 2 or 3 years old if you really need to. Don't waste your money on something like these for actual daily use. Given that these are some of the features that we still use today, I'll give the iPhone a 9 out of 10 for notable features. So the moment that we've all been waiting for, the final tally and scores for the iPhone 6 Plus and the LG G3 to see which one won the 7-year test. So the winner of the 7-year test is the iPhone 6 Plus. Surprisingly, in all honesty, it's just a 1-point difference, so the iPhone 6 Plus got 38 points while the G3 got 37. So you can honestly call it a draw. However, if you want to talk technical, this technically won by 1 point. But in all honesty, it's a draw. I was really surprised when I finished scripting this video to see that the iPhone 6 Plus came so close with the LG G3, just because I thought that this actually would have won because it had the newer design and such, but the cameras really let it down, and the processor actually let it down too. So in the end, the iPhone 6 Plus wins just because you actually get more software support with this officially, and you actually get better cameras and just an overall better phone, I feel like. If you had both phones' batteries replaced, this would actually last you longer. However, the thing that is nice with the G3 is that you can remove the battery and add another one in if you really want to. Also, if you're curious, I have a phone scoreboard for every phone that I've reviewed, and you can find that down in the description below if you want to take a look at the other phones I've reviewed and compare them to the G3 and the iPhone 6 Plus. So that's going to be it for today's video. Let me know if there's anything that I missed or I should have covered, and if you also use an iPhone 6 Plus today or an LG G3, I want to know. So remember, please like and subscribe to see more content just like this, and thanks for watching.